All right, so let's get started. Okay, let's get started. Our Father in heaven, I thank you, Lord, for this morning, for this time that we can spend together. And I thank you for this technology that we can connect wherever we are. And I ask that you would join us at this time, for you're the great physician, and we need your wisdom. So I ask that you would guide us as we talk about our subject, hypertension, this morning. And I also ask that you would be with all of those who are watching right now or listening right now, and all of those who will watch later by the recording, and especially all of those who haven't been able to come yet. And I ask that you would be with them as well. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So, good morning again, everyone, and welcome to Thursday. And so we're going to just, thank you. That's okay, I can take care of it. So we're going to jump right into our subject, which is reversing hypertension naturally. Pretty much everyone knows someone who has high blood pressure, or maybe you yourself have high blood pressure and not sure what to do about it, or maybe your doctor put you on certain medication, whether it's metoprolol or lisinopril or losartan or hydrochlorothiazide or whatever it is. These are all very common medications, atenolol, right? And it seems to be the case that often even with those medications, we still don't really have the blood pressure issue under control, right? So of course we want to learn how can we deal with it from a natural standpoint. So your blood pressure has everything to do with your cardiovascular system, right? So we have cardio, which refers to your heart, and vascular, which refers to your blood vessels, right? So your heart and your blood vessels. Your heart, you can see there, if you can see my mouse, you can see your blood, your deoxygenated blood, returns to the heart from the body through here, through these veins. These are the biggest veins of the body. We call this the vena cava. And these are the blood vessels that carry the deoxygenated blood from your body back to your heart. It dumps it into the right atrium. It goes through the tricuspid valve and into the right ventricle. Your ventricles contract, and then it forces that blood from there out to your pulmonary artery, which is represented right here through the pulmonic vein to the pulmonary arteries, right here, here and here, and that goes out to the to your lungs. So that's what you can see, all of this, these blood vessels here and blood vessels here. These are the arteries, well, the blood vessels of your lungs. And then you have an exchange of gases there, so your oxygen, carbon dioxide, and then your blood becomes oxygenated out in the lungs. And then you have the oxygenated blood that returns back to the heart, and that is through the pulmonary veins, gets into the left side of the heart, through the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, into the mitral valve, into the left ventricle, and then your heart contracts. And it forces that oxygenated blood out through the aortic valve into the aorta. So here it is, the aorta is right here. This is carrying oxygenated blood, and notice how it kind of curves and it goes down. So that will take oxygen-rich blood down to the lower part of your body. And you have all these branches up here which will take oxygenated blood to, to your arms and up to your head, and you also have oxygenated blood that travels also to your internal organs, such as even the heart itself, right? You have the coronary artery. So this system, this heart and blood vessels, essentially it works like a hydraulic pump, right? A hydraulic pump. So you have a motor, a pump of some sort, and then you have piping, and then you have fluid inside those pipes, right? And of course, the bigger the diameter of those pipes, the lower the pressure. But anything that you do that closes the diameter or shrinks the diameter, reduces the diameter of the piping, it will increase the pressure. For example, if you have your garden hose and you open the garden hose and you have water coming out, if you put your thumb on the front of the the end of the garden hose where the water's coming out, you know that the pressure increases, right? The pressure increases, and that's because you are now reducing the diameter of the piping, right? So, sorry, give me just a second. All right. And welcome everyone who has been just joining as well. We're going to keep going here. So this is how the heart and blood vessels work. Essentially, this pump and these this piping, right? So your blood pressure it's kind of influenced by many different systems of your body. So it's not just the blood vessels and it's not just the heart, but your blood pressure is influenced by your diet, for example. The more dietary salt you take in, for example, blood pressure can go up. Your blood pressure is influenced by your sympathetic nervous system. So you can see up at the top a picture of the brain, and you have the the hypothalamus, and that's where the sympathetic nervous fibers from the autonomic nervous system begin. And based on the perceived need in the mind, this system can control the tone of your blood vessels. So you see here down at the bottom right, you can see an artery, and you can see that there's a certain amount of tone, or there's a certain diameter here because of this muscle here, which is either constricted or dilated. And so the sympathetic nervous system does keep a certain amount of tone, right? It keeps a certain amount of tone. And when you if you didn't have a basic tone, your blood vessels would just be completely relaxed and you would die. Your blood pressure would drop to zero, right? So you need some kind of tone, and I'm so thankful God gave us this sympathetic nervous system, or just generally the autonomic nervous system, which controls these things automatically for us without having to think about it. But there are things that happen that we think about that can actually alter the response that we get from the sympathetic nervous system, right? So yeah, so there's diet, there's the hypothalamus, the sympathetic nerves. There's also the adrenals, right? The adrenal glands that can also influence blood pressure, and many other things as well. So here are the contributing factors. So there's, of course, sex, stress, like environmental stress. You have genetics. You have the central nervous system, as we looked at earlier. You have the heart itself, the cardiac output. So if your heart is weak and not able to pump well, that's another factor. Or if it's, there's a few factors that. Then there's the kidneys, right? When you have kidney issues, you can have sodium retention, which can lead to increased blood volume and increased blood pressure. You have the gastrointestinal uh, system. There are different things that you could be taking in that might be influencing your blood pressure. And of course, there's the endocrine system. There's different hormones, right? Like insulin, aldosterone, whatever. Then you also actually have the muscle of the blood vessels themselves, right? So, like for example, you have the endothelium of your blood vessels, which produces nitric oxide, uh, and that can help the smooth muscle to dilate. Or you can do certain bad habits that can cause the smooth muscle, that elastic tissue, to become less and less and less elastic, and it becomes stiff, right? Or it can be clogged up with things from your diet, right? So there's so many factors that contribute to hypertension, and we find that it's almost always a lifestyle related issue, right? So let's look at some of those factors. Age is one of them. Of course, as we age, our blood pressures tend to increase over time. However, it's interesting that if you go to populations, for example, there's a population in the Amazon where uh, they have people who are elderly, and their blood pressures are very similar to that of uh, to their blood pressures are similar to that of the younger ones in their group of people, and they find that these individuals, they have blood pressure, they have normal blood pressure when they're young, they have normal blood pressure when they're older, and it doesn't really change very much over time. And they find that they eat a very, very, very pristine diet. I mean, a very clean diet. They're they're eating mostly like fruits, nuts, uh, grains, vegetables, things like that, and but mostly like fruits is like the big part of their diet, and they almost never have hypertension, or they have very few cases, I should say, of hypertension in those kind of populations. So it's interesting that yes, age is a factor, and that is because our arteries do become stiffer over time, so they don't, they that's part of the problem. Um, but interestingly, that older people in certain populations that take care of themselves very well tend to not have issues with hypertension as they age. So that's something to keep in mind. Alcohol. Um, Not really sure what the connection is directly with alcohol, but it does tend to seem that who have people who have who do take in alcohol do have increased blood pressure issues. Part of that may be because alcohol does interfere with the autonomic nervous system and its functions. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Um, Chronic kidney disease is another one, right? So why does kidney disease affect blood pressure? Well, you have the whole renin angiotensin um, and aldosterone, that whole cycle there. And the issue is when your kidneys are not functioning well, you could have, well, issues with those body chemicals, right? And you can also have sodium retention in your blood. And as the sodium, of course, retains in your blood vessels, and just like salt attracts water to itself, right? So when you have more salt, you have water traveling towards it. So of course, if you have more sodium that's being retained, it will also increase your blood volume and lead to hypertension as well. So chronic kidney disease is definitely one of the factors for hypertension. Illegal drugs is another one, right? Illegal drugs is another one. And especially, cocaine, amphetamines, they can increase blood pressure, cause heart attacks, and cocaine's effect is mediated through increased cardiac output, and amphetamines effects are mediated through increased sympathetic tone. You know, when we talked about the vasculature, the blood vessels, and how the nerves control that, and they can either make the blood vessels constrict or allow them to dilate. So the amphetamines, of course, increase that tone, which causes vasoconstriction, right? But not only illegal drugs, but also legal drugs too. Also legal drugs, right? So Tylenol, which is acetaminophen, your NSAIDs, cough and cold meds, nasal decongestants, birth control pills, estrogens, testosterone, antidepressants, steroids, angiogenesis inhibitors, which are anti-cancer drugs, immunosuppressants, migraine medication, performance-enhancing drugs, and then caffeine. Yes, we're calling caffeine a drug, right? All of these things can contribute to high blood pressure, right? And genetics is also another one, and that's because our genes basically our genes are the information that's written, right? Basically about everything about us. So our cells and the way that they function, and basically any part of us. So if there's any damage to our DNA through mutations and other things, other habits that we may be doing that cause mutations. Okay, it's saying my internet connection's unstable. I'm gonna keep going, hoping that it resolves itself. So yeah, genetics plays a role. Hyperthyroidism plays a role, right? And hyperthyroidism, particularly, it is, your thyroid controls many of the thyroid hormone anyway. It is involved in basically the metabolic process of almost all your cells. I think all your cells pretty much. And so when you are overproducing that, you could have an increase. It's kind of like having an increase metabolism, and it can lead to a isolated systolic blood pressure. Right, very good. Welcome, everyone. So another one is leptin. Obesity. So being overweight, the issue here is before leptin, one of the issues that you can have here is the fact that you're carrying around weight, and of course, when you are carrying around the weight physically, that can increase your blood pressure because you're now you're putting out a greater effort, right, to move around. But the bigger problem is this thing called leptin, amongst other things. I mean, especially if there's visceral fat. Visceral fat is the fat that's that you can't see. It's the one on the inside that causes the belly to kind of go out. It's that one that's on the inside that kind of goes around all of your your organs, and it tends to be highly inflammatory, and so that can cause issues. And then you have leptin. Leptin is a hormone that is put out by your fat cells. And leptin, it can what it does is it actually normally it goes to your brain and basically tells your brain that you feel full. So leptin should be a good thing, right? The problem is when we have too much leptin. Right? When we have too much leptin, then our brain kind of gets used to the signal, and it becomes kind of numb to it. So it doesn't it's not as effective, right? So when there's high amounts of leptin, you tend to not feel full, which is ironic because leptin is supposed to tell your brain that you feel full. And anyway, so leptin can also stimulates the hypothalamus, which is the part of our brain which is responsible for the autonomic nervous system again, and the sympathetic, which is the fight or flight response, which can increase our blood pressure. Okay. So physical inactivity, right? Physical inactivity can also lead to hypertension by augmenting resting and reflex-mediated sympathetic output to the splenic circulation, also by increasing vascular sensitivity to androgenic stimulation, right? Salt, excess salt. So excess salt intake over a prolonged period of time is also known. It's a known contributing factor to hypertension. And I'm actually intentionally showing you my notes so you can read along some of those things with me that might be hard to grasp otherwise. So it says some studies have indicated that excess salt in the diet may upregulate mineralocorticoid receptors in the nephrons, leading to increased sodium reabsorption, hence water retention. Also, excess salt may lead to increased renal-specific sympathetic activity, resulting in increased beta-2 adrenergic receptor activation, which decreases sodium diuresis and results in the same sodium and water retention. What it's saying is essentially, either way, there are issues whenever there are issues with the kidneys. Essentially, it leads to sodium retention, which then leads to water retention, right? But even if you don't have kidney damage, but you just have excess salt anyway in the diet, then you can have issues from that standpoint. Okay. Okay, so somebody asked a very good question. As if you're reading the chat, you can see it as well. If salt is such a problem in hypertension, why doesn't a no salt diet regulate the blood pressure? Well, the reality is a low salt diet, you do need some salt. And if you have no salt, then that will cause other issues. You do need some salt. The issue is most people have too much salt, right? So what we typically do is we have a low sodium diet, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So stick with me for a minute. We're going to get there, okay? That was to Michelle. Thank you. Okay. Here we go. All right. Smoking, it's also a very well-known contributor to high blood pressure, right? We know nicotine as a stimulant, and it does increase the contractility of the heart, and it does contribute to constriction or the constriction of the blood vessels, as we had mentioned before. And smoking has a number of other issues as well. Impairment of the endothelial function. So endothelium is the inside of the blood vessels. So it can cause issues with that, cause damage to that, and it can cause them to become stiff, as I mentioned earlier. Of course, there's inflammation and other issues as well, right? And is there a difference between, so I'm getting another question, is there a difference between sea salt and Himalayan pink salt versus table salt? Table salt is linked to high blood pressure. The key is moderation, even with good things. Yes, and that's a very good point, which I'm also coming to as well. Yes, there is a difference between salts. And yes, Himalayan pink salt tends to be better than the regular table salt that you find, and that's because it has other minerals, which include things like magnesium, which can actually lower blood pressure, right? So again, we're getting to that. So save the questions towards the end. Keep them good, write them down, keep them coming, write them down. But we'll probably get around to questions towards the end. So here we go. So sleep apnea is another cause of hypertension. And again, we're not really sure what the mechanism is here, but we do know that obesity is a risk factor for hypertension. And obesity is usually correlated with obstructive sleep apnea, especially. Also, people who just don't sleep well in general have higher blood pressures in general. I actually tested this. I went down, we have a paper mill just a few miles up the road, and I took a group of students there, and we did a little health expo there, and we measured the blood pressures of the workers who were coming off of the graveyard shift, the night shift, and just these are young guys. They're like in their late 20s, early 30s, not past their mid 40s, and we're just checking their blood pressures, and their blood pressures are like 210 over 110 or something like that. I mean, very, very high blood pressures. And it's just most likely for one of the biggest things is because they just are working, and they are working and not sleeping, during the times they need to sleep. So another thing is stress, right? Psychosocial stress, occupational stress, marital stress, social isolation, low socioeconomic status, even racial discrimination. All these things have been directly linked to hypertension as well. And we will talk about this a little bit later. Okay. So what are we looking for as far as a healthy blood pressure, right? So you have what is normal. They used to say 120 over 80 was normal, right? But they're actually finding that it's actually less than 120 over less than 80. So the 1-teens over 70s or something like that. That's around what you're looking at for a normal, healthy blood pressure. Elevated is 120 to 129 over less than 80. So you can still have a normal diastolic, the bottom number, the diastolic blood pressure, but you can still have a elevated systolic blood pressure in the 120s. Hypertension stage 1 is now when you get to 130 over 80. Okay, so 130 over 80 to 139 over 89. Okay, so any combination of those numbers would be hypertension stage 1. Okay, and then we have hypertension stage 2, which is what a lot of people wrestle with, which is greater than or equal to 140, so at least 140 over at least 90, right? And so this is the range that a lot of people float in. And I've seen so many people come into our lifestyle center and they have hypertension stage 1, hypertension stage 2. Matter of fact, a lot of them have hypertension stage 2 on their medications. And I'm wondering, wow, that means that they're not really controlled, even though they're taking their medications faithfully, right? So that is definitely an issue. Oh, come on. What's going on? Did it freeze? Wait a sec. All right. High blood pressure symptoms. So, high blood pressure is often referred to as the silent killer, right? And it's called the silent killer because often the first symptom of high blood pressure is a heart attack or stroke, right? So we don't want to see that. I mean, definitely you can have some feelings, like you might have, some people have headaches or, nausea or, just not feeling well, dizziness. Sometimes you have ringing in your ears, things like that when your blood pressure is high. But to be honest with you, a lot of people don't have those things while their blood pressure is high. I mean, you looked at the ranges. I mean, even in the 120s, it can be elevated, right? So a lot of people, and the thing is, over time, you can get used to your blood pressure. So if you're used to your blood pressure being at 180 over 95, then if you suddenly bring that blood pressure down to 117 over 65, you'll actually feel bad if you got used to your blood pressure being high. It's the same thing with blood sugars. We can get used to it being at the wrong levels. And so a lot of people are living in this hypertensive state without even realizing it, right? The main complications of persistent high blood pressure, of course, is in the brain. Of course, you can have strokes. You can have hypertensive encephalopathy, which is when you have swelling around the brain. You can have confusion, headaches, convulsions. Of course, you can have hypertensive retinopathy, and you have damage to the retinas of your eyes. Of course, in your blood, you can have other issues there. In your heart, you can have a heart attack or cardiomyopathy or heart failures. In your kidneys, you can have nephropathy and chronic renal failure. And so, of course, there are lots of things that go wrong with with hypertension. And so I want to, Okay, so I'm going to jump through these steps, okay? Some of the steps of how to overcome hypertension naturally, right? Because that's really the most important thing. Knowing, first of all, if you have hypertension or not, right? Or if it's someone you know who you want to help. And then the next thing is, well, then what do we do about it, right? Because obviously the drug medications don't always work very well. And not to say that they can't, definitely those things can lower the blood pressure, but remember, we want to learn how to reason from cause to effect, right? The cause of hypertension, I can say pretty confidently, the cause of hypertension is not a lack of hydrochlorothiazide. It's not a lack of lisinopril. It's not a lack of metoprolol or losartan or any of those things. So we have to look at it from a cause and effect standpoint. The cause of hypertension is not a lack of medication. And obviously we see enough people who come on with their medications who still have hypertension, right? And so we need to talk about how can we reverse this naturally, right? So step one, fasting. Fasting, right? Fasting means no food except just drinking water and or herbal teas, right? And in our 50 years of experience at Uchee Pines, that has been one of the beloved treatment modalities that we've used here to treat a number of things. One of them tends to be fasting. So just calorie restriction, calorie elimination, really, for about 3 days, 5 days maybe, and just going with drinking fluids. Right. Here was an individual. I'm going to show you in just a second. And here's an individual who came to our lifestyle center, and he basically tried everything. I mean, tried switching his diet and was eating pretty clean. He tried different supplements and all kinds of things and herbs, and nothing was working. His blood pressure just kept staying up. And he said, well, let's try fasting. And so as he started fasting, his blood pressure, boom, 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 came down really nicely within just a few days. It came down to normal. So fasting definitely does help, and it's one of the ways that we can help treat hypertension. Step 2, eat a low sodium diet. And this one is, I'm going to actually do this. Hang on a sec. I know what I need to do. Make this. There we go. So now you can kind of see a little bit of my notes, and you can see the slide too. So eat a low sodium diet. So what does that mean? It means consuming less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. Now that's a very, very, very small amount of sodium, right? That's about 3/4 of a teaspoon. I'm at home now, right? By the way, welcome to my living room. I'm gonna grab a teaspoon. So this is, all right. Here's a tablespoon. Here's a teaspoon. We're talking about even less than this teaspoon is how much salt, if you're trying to reverse hypertension, that's how much salt we should be consuming in the whole day, right? This is if you're hypertensive and wanting to reverse it. So we have to pay attention to all of the different things that potentially are containing lots of salt, right? So eating out, eating processed meats, or eating potato chips, or those kind of snacks, or cheese and dairy products, and even there's lots of hidden salt in different things like bread, and it's everywhere, right? So we're talking about, if you really want to reverse that high blood pressure and you want to aggressively work with it, you want to of course do some fasting, and then eliminate all of the excess salt and get into a low sodium diet. And this can be done even with regular salt. I mean, you don't have to be, I know that we're looking for the Celtic salt, or we're looking for the Himalayan salt, but this can even be done with just whatever salt, and you can still have similar effects. You work with what you have and what you can do, right? There we go. So here's Reggie. He had hypertension and kidney failure, and his issues actually worsened while he was here, but he kept going on the plan. He kept doing the low sodium diet and all the other things we were doing for his renal failure. And eventually his kidney failure actually turned around, it resolved. And then afterwards, his high blood pressure also turned around and resolved. But it took months. It took a few months after he left here, and he learned it. Our sessions here are 17 days long, which, by the way, if you guys have not been here, you need to come here for a session. It is well worth your while. Some people spend $20,000 in a weekend at the hospital, or you can spend much less than that coming here for a session, and learn how to completely reverse or eliminate the need to go to the hospital altogether. So so come spend some time with us. That's my little plug-in for today. So anyway, so Reggie, his kidney failure resolved, his hypertension resolved. It took months, but during his stay here, it was like, not sure which way it's going to go. But you can learn the habits and learn what you need to do in the 2.5 weeks that you're here, and then you continue that. And it may not resolve immediately, but in the time of consistency, it will, and it often does, for example, in his case. Step 3, you want to maintain a high sodium to potassium ratio, right? So the foods in your diet which are high sodium to high potassium to sodium ratio. So you want to maintain a high potassium to sodium ratio, and the foods that tend to be high potassium but low sodium are basically your nuts, your seeds, your legumes, your peas, your lentils, and the one that tends to be the best is soy. I'm going to show you a list here: nuts and seeds, legumes, dried fruits, whole grains, fruits, mushrooms, lamb's quarters. Now, lamb's quarters, I'm not talking about lamb chops. I'm saying lamb's quarters, which is the greens. There's a greens called lamb's quarters, apparently. And I'm going to show you here in my notes the list of different things that you can kind of see, and you can see the potassium to sodium ratio. So hazelnuts, for example, 755 to 0, pecans 410 to 0. But then you look at pistachios, raw pistachios, over 1,000 to 1. Almonds, 746 to 1. You go down to soybeans. Cooked soybeans are 515 to 1. So that's really good. Soybeans is a really good one. You can look at, pinto beans, kidney beans, whatever, black beans. But you look at soybeans, dry roasted soybeans, and they're 1,364 to 2. I mean, that's amazing. I think that's actually the best number on this whole list. Wheat brand's a good one. So you just go down the list and you see there's a lot of things. There's lamb's quarter, it's very high. So the best foods, I mean, I would definitely include soy on there because that's got a good potassium to sodium ratio. Now, don't undo it by then completely saturating your soybeans with salt, right? That'll undo what you're trying to do. So we want to make sure that we're temperate and being fair to yourself, right? Oh yeah, and then of course squash and potatoes. Step 4, we definitely want to include blood pressure reducing foods, right? By the way, I just want to mention before I continue, you notice that I have these little numbers at the end of each thing. So the reason why the numbers are there is because at the end, the last 2 pages of this, which is on the downloadable PDF that you have, these are the references for the research studies that shows these things. So I would encourage you to take a look at that document, download it. You're privileged to have it for free during this session. So, or as a participant of this session. So, so I'm just going to mention a few things, and I just want to say also, because I know somebody's going to ask, I realize that there are many, many, many other things as well, but these are the ones that tend to stand out in the research right now. So I'd just like to share those. So black seeds, especially, so you can take 0.5 to 2 grams of black seed powder daily, or the oil, up to 3 grams daily, black seed oil. And you can do that for about 4 to 12 weeks. Blonde psyllium is another one. 3.5 grams 3 times a day for 6 months. Flax seeds, right? Garlic and flax seeds, you can take, grind the flax seeds and take about 2 tablespoons of that a day. Garlic is another one. We typically recommend around 6 to 10 cloves of garlic a day for most individuals who come here. Olive oil, sorry, not olive oil, olives, not the olive oil. brain's not working all that straight. So the olives can also help. Wheat bran, as we looked at earlier, which has the high potassium to sodium ratio. You can also use blood pressure reducing supplements, right? For example, CoQ10, coenzyme Q10, and we recommend about 100, 200 milligrams daily. CoQ10 is one of the most well-known antioxidants. It's very well studied, well documented, and it's an antioxidant that you have in your body, and it has a special affinity towards the heart muscle, especially. And so, individuals who have had heart attacks, for example, when they take CoQ10, they're less likely to have a reoccurrence of another heart attack. So that's good, right? Folic acid as well, which is B9, vitamin B9. Guar gum is another one. L-arginine. L-arginine is amino acid that it's used to produce nitric oxide. And if you remember, I talked about this earlier. Your blood vessels, the inside of the blood vessels, the endothelium, it actually puts out this molecule called nitric oxide, and it tends to do it especially when we're exercising. So when you exercise, your nitric oxide production increases over time, and your body uses L-arginine in order to produce that nitric oxide. Other things. So somebody asked a question about what teas can you take. So two of the ones that definitely have some research behind it that seem to work well is hibiscus, which is very well known and widely available, so we have hibiscus. Olive leaf is another one. Okay, olive leaf. And there are other ones that we don't have on here, but on this slide, but I can throw them in there that we tend to use in addition to these things, and that would be corn silk, dandelion, hawthorn berries. And many people are familiar with hawthorn because they tend to put them in a lot of blood pressure supplements now. But corn silk and dandelion. Corn silk is, the little hairs on top of your corn, and you can actually dry it and steep it and make a tea out of it, and it acts as a diuretic, so it actually helps you get rid of fluid, right? So corn silk and dandelion together work as diuretics. And then you have hawthorn and hawthorn berries, which also can help. And so you combine them all together. So hibiscus, olive leaf, corn silk, dandelion, hawthorn, and you have a pretty good tea for lowering blood pressure. Okay. And so, all right. Exercise, right? So exercise has been shown to reduce high blood pressure. Of course, while you're exercising, your blood pressure does go up, but afterwards it does come down, and it overall lowers your blood pressure, right? And it has to do with that thing that I mentioned earlier about the nitric oxide production. Of course, avoiding caffeine, alcohol, tobacco, all of those things which can have a number of negative effects, not just on your blood pressure, but pretty much anything is worsened by alcohol, caffeine, tobacco. So you really want to stay away from those things. And someone's probably wondering, well, caffeine's not that bad. Well, it does cause death sometimes, very rarely, but it is the most consumed addictive drug in the United States, and it does contribute to hypertension. So we want to stay away from those things. Of course, step 9 is losing weight. Our fat tissue produces that hormone leptin, right? And so, of course, the faster we reduce our weight, the less leptin is produced, and And then the brain sends fewer of those signals to the cardiovascular system, and that results in a reduction of blood pressure as well. Sunshine, doing some sunbathing, especially. If you have high blood pressure, you can go out and lay in the sun, and you can actually measure this, right? And usually in just about 20 minutes of laying out in the sun, and I'm not talking about clothes, I mean like, you expose yourself, expose your back to the sun, and you can see sometimes around a 30 or 40 point drop in blood pressure. So definitely sunbathing is excellent. Getting a good amount of sleep, right? Of course, any amount of sleep deprivation can cause blood pressure changes, and how the brain can also change in its response, right, to the blood pressure signals, which can alter things in the long run. So really getting into a good regular sleep pattern, and you want to get to bed as soon as you can before midnight rather than after midnight, because you want to get the benefits of having the other hormones that are produced during different times before midnight. Let's get a good amount of sleep. Do some deep breathing. Here's something we can do together. So we call this the 4-7-9 breathing technique, and it works remarkably well for lowering blood pressure immediately. I've actually checked this on a number of individuals where I would have a blood pressure cuff, on their arm, and have another physician there, and we're both checking it, and like, okay. and so we would have the blood pressure cuff on, and their blood pressure, we check it right before, and then we do this technique with them, which I'm going to show you right now. We do this technique with them for maybe a couple of minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then we check their blood pressure right after, and you can see I've seen like a 40-point drop in blood pressure around that time. Most people will find around a 5 to 20-point drop just within a couple of minutes of doing this. But that individual just had a tremendous drop. So here we go. You breathe. The 4-7-9 stands for 4. You breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds. 7, you retain it. You retain that breath in your lungs for 7 seconds. And then 9, you exhale through your mouth for 9 seconds. Okay? So we can do this one together. So here we go. 4-7-9. So inhale through your nose for 4. Hold it in your lungs for 7. Exhale through your mouth for 9. Ready? Here we go. Again. Again. So I can't actually do it much more than that because my blood pressure is already dropping, and I don't want to pass out in front of you. That'd be pretty bad. But you can keep doing it if you feel like you're feeling good. Usually that technique can also, it will cause muscle relaxation. So it's a really good thing to do, especially right before bed. It's a good thing to do if you're stressed. Just take a moment, go outside, do this breathing technique for a few minutes, and pray, and and get your head on straight. But it can lower blood pressure. And the thing that's amazing to me about it is that it's a non-drug modality. It's free. You can do it wherever you are, anywhere you are. You can do it on a plane. You can do it in bed. You can do it outside. You can do it in church or at work. It doesn't matter. You can do it wherever you are. And you can, it's the only vital sign that you can actually control. You can't control your, you can't control your your heart rate on will, or you can't control your blood pressure on will, or your blood sugar on will, or your temperature, but you can control your breathing, and it does affect your blood pressure. So I would encourage you guys to practice this. It's a free, easy thing to do, and you should do it if you're hypertensive. You can do it multiple times through the day, so you can pretty much do it every hour, and that will decrease your overall arterial pressure for the day. Okay. Step 13, reduce your environmental noise. There are studies that show that if you have a house on a busy street, and if you are an inmate of the room that's closer to the street, your blood pressure will be higher than the person who lives in the back of the house with their room facing away from the busy street. So there is evidence that shows that environmental noise, especially constant noise, it can stimulate that fight or flight response and lead to increased blood pressure. So the ideal situation is to get away from busy areas, get away from the cities, live in the country somewhere. It's a really good thing to do for your blood pressure. Step 14, doing hydrotherapy, so hot foot baths or general baths. Heat causes your blood vessels to expand, call it vasodilation. So if you put your feet in hot water, it'll cause the blood vessels in your feet to expand or dilate, and that will cause your blood. So if you're having like a migraine headache or something, or you're having like cramps or something like abdominal cramps or ladies' menstrual cramps or whatever, you stick your feet in hot water, and it will actually draw the blood away from, of course not entirely, but it'll draw the congested blood, which may be because of inflammation or whatever. It'll draw it away from the area down to your feet. Or if you stick your whole body in either a neutral bath or in a hot bath around, these 102 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever, and you just sit there, that will also lower your blood pressure by causing your blood vessels to dilate, right? Step 15, eliminate the stress. I can't, excuse the pun, but I can't stress this enough, right? It's actually true that stress does cause blood pressure issues, and I've seen it go either way. I've seen too low blood pressure from a stress response, or too high blood pressure from a stress response, and that's because it causes dysregulation in your autonomic nervous system. And the interesting thing is, if you think about it, your blood pressure, it definitely is influenced and controlled by your sympathetic nervous system. And let's think about this for a second. Your sympathetic nervous system doesn't necessarily control itself. It has to receive input from the brain, and the brain has to receive input from the mind. So when you see something, you perceive something, right? And you take in that information to the cerebral cortex of your brain. So what you see, what you hear, what you touch, you taste, you smell, whatever, you take that information in physically from your analog environment. You take the information in, and the mind now has to interpret that information and determine if this is something that you have good feelings towards or bad feelings towards. And based on whatever the perception is, you will have a signal sent from the hypothalamus down your nervous system to every cell of your body, right? And one of those things that will happen is if you are perceiving a situation and it is causing you to fear or to be anxious or whatever, then your sympathetic nervous system will start to dominate. When your sympathetic nervous system starts to dominate, I can't tell you how many people are living in a constant sympathetic situation, sympathetic nervous response, where they're under stress, constant issues, whether it's relationship issues, financial issues, negative experiences from the past. Maybe somebody hurt you, maybe someone sexually abused you or verbally abused you or emotionally abused you. And those things from the past, we try to pretend like we're grown-ups, and we carry it with us all throughout our lives, things that are way in our childhood or even things that may have happened yesterday, right? And not just that, but our negative thinking, loneliness, bitterness, guilt, all these things we tend to carry with us, right? And I'm going to defer to Dr. Mark's evening Law of Life series to learn how to deal with that aspect of this. But I can just tell you right off the bat that out of all of the issues that we listed, this is probably the biggest one. For sure, you need to sleep better. For sure, we need some sunshine. For sure, we got to get a quiet environment and do some deep breathing and eat a high potassium to sodium ratio foods and all that stuff. I mean, that's needed. But if all of those things are in line and this issue is not resolved, we will still have our issue. So it's very important. If you need peace, that's really what we need, right? Forgiveness. And there are numerous studies. There's a study in the American Journal of Phys Med and Rehab. There's another study in the American Psychological Association that show that people who have a positive spiritual experience characterized by forgiveness physically recover better, right? So there is something to this, and I would say that it really is foundational in overcoming any disease process, is dealing with the issues in the heart, the issues in the mind, and so for sure eliminating those stressors, right? So yeah, you can move into a quieter area, but now we have to actually deal with those things that are plaguing the mind, plaguing us on the inside, right? And that's a peace that no human can give us. That's a peace that can only come from a living, loving God. And he's extending it to you. It's a matter of, will you take it, or do you want to carry your grief with you, right? In summary, here are the things that you can take to overcome high blood pressure fast, right? We want to fast, eat a low sodium diet, low salt diet, maintain a high potassium to sodium ratio, include blood pressure reducing foods, use blood pressure reducing supplements, use blood pressure reducing herbs, exercise, avoid caffeine, alcohol, tobacco, lose weight, get good sunshine, get good sleep, deep breathe, reduce your environmental noise, do hydrotherapy treatments, eliminate your stress, and you will look like that guy in no time. And so yeah, and here are those references which you can download the PDF and look at them yourself. So I won't really talk about that. So yeah, I just want to encourage you all to do these things, to learn them and to become good at it, and find out for yourself that it works, and you can be able to help many, many other people. I'm going to just say a quick word of prayer, and for those who may need to go, they can go, and then I'll stay maybe just a couple more minutes and try to answer some of the questions, and then we'll see you in our next segment, right? So let's pray. Heavenly Father, I do want to thank you for just for providing for us some simple natural remedies, these things that now research is finding out they work, but you've been telling us all along what we need to do. And so I'm just really thankful to know that you are fighting for us, that you want us to be in good health, and you've provided the means for us to get into that health. And so I ask that you be with each one of my dear friends who are listening, whether they're listening now live or recorded later. And I ask that you would give them the courage and the power to do what they need to do for their own health, and that they would be able to trust in you and believe in your promises. And especially when it comes to the stress issue, the foundational issue, I ask that you would give them peace, as they rely heavily on you. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.